As preparation for our Brazil trip, we'll do an overview of Brazil, where we'll look at Brazil in general and a little bit at the agricultural economy. Later on, we'll drill down and learn a little bit more in depth.
Brazil is the largest and most centralized part in the Southern American continent. It is the fifth largest in the world with a land size of 8.516 million km square, 33% arable land, and a population of 202 million. 60.2% of its population is aged 15 to 54 and has a literacy rate of 19.4%. Brazil's GDP in 2014 is ranked 7 globally, higher than major agriculture exporting countries. Brazil holds 12% global shares in exports of goods and services and was ranked 5th in agricultural exports. These are the top 5 export destinations. Current FDI and exports are 5.246 billion and 15.485 billion USD respectively.
That was a lot of information. Let's go over some of it and let's try to put it in U.S. terms. In agricultural land, that is land that's in crop production or pasture, Brazil has 680 million acres. The U.S., on the other hand, has about 1 billion acres. Gross domestic product for the Brazilian economy is $2.346 trillion. The U.S. gross domestic product is $17.419 trillion. If you look at agriculture as a part of the economy, agriculture contributes about $131 billion to the Brazilian economy and about $243 billion to the U.S. economy. But Brazil is a huge exporter.
Brazil is forecast to become the largest beef and poultry exporter in the world over the next 10 years. A report released by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the OECD shows Brazil is on course to overtake the United States by 2024. The report says Brazil is already the largest supplier of sugar, orange juice and coffee in the world. The report notes that since China is Brazil's largest buyer in terms of food, the Asian country's future economic growth will have a huge impact on how much food Brazil will export abroad.
As you just saw, Brazil is a huge agricultural exporter. Did you notice, though, that China is their biggest customer? This is having a big effect on the Brazil economy with China's downturn this year. If you look at the value, though, of their exports, and just a couple of years ago, Brazil exported about $55 billion worth of agricultural products. For comparison, in the United States, we export about $118 billion worth of agricultural products. And if you look at the list for Brazilian exports, it's long. Sugar, they're the largest in the world. Soybeans, they just surpassed us this year to become the largest in the world. They're a big exporter of corn, cotton, rice. Beef, maybe next to us, maybe even bigger than us. Poultry, a huge exporter of poultry and a big competitor to the U.S. Coffee, the world's largest exporter. Tobacco, actually again the world's largest exporter of flue-cured tobacco. And orange juice, the world's largest exporter. Let's look at a quick overview of Brazil's general economy, their economic situation now, and their political situation.
Brazil is ranked 59 in economic fundamentals, 102 in ease of doing business, 79 in quality of regulations and governance, 94 in rule of law, and 41 in investment potential index. The current annual inflation rate is 9.53% due to political instability, ranked 111th on the PSI. Over the past 5 years, the GDP annual growth rate has fallen along with decreased investments and domestic consumption. Contributing factors are rising inflation rates, high interest rates, and foreign exchange rate. Despite these conditions, FDI shows no sign of decreasing and forecast says GDP will bounce back only after 2018. Brazil's recent political scene is unstable under Dilma Rousseff's 2 terms as president. She has been criticized for funding the World Cup and firing ministers over corruption allegations. However, her latest scandal on Petrobras left thousands unemployed, Brazil in recession, and a 0.5% deficit in the 2016 budget. However, she did implement measures to reduce fiscal deficits. There is no immediate external threat as Brazil has 360 billion in reserve. These are the regulators in the Brazilian capital market and financial systems. To operate in Brazil, you'll need to apply for 4 permits that takes at least 135 days and cost 1,145 BRL. In terms of employment, the minimum salary is 678 BRL per month, excluding staff benefits. The government charges an additional 68% over each employee's payroll. Confusing, outdated regulations, companies find it hard to comply, causing high labor claims. Hence, many operate illegally, which is cheaper. Brazil is a member of 3 associations with countries around its borders, excluding the BRIC. Its policies portray an open attitude towards foreign investors, where full ownership is possible, foreign companies are treated equally, and foreign investors are eligible for incentives such as indirect tax reduction. With centuries of European domination, Brazil's official language is Portuguese, and its culture is one of the world's most diverse. In business, Brazilians prefer to deal with individuals than with companies. Hence, there is a need to establish a trusting relationship. The good point about Brazilians is that they are less individualistic, but are habitually late. One strength of Brazil is that it is pro-exporting, especially as a manufacturing base. There's also a high abundance of natural resources and young labor force. Foreign investors benefit from these incentives, and setting up a business is relatively easy. The challenges faced in Brazil are the extensive regulations, high interest rates, and lack of infrastructure. The transparency is low and corruption still exists. Companies have to deal with complex tax and labor regulations, which is higher than China and India.
Enlightening, huh? Did you catch what the minimum wage was and what the taxes paid on wages were? The minimum wage, when you put it in US dollars per month, is about $179. Payroll taxes are 68% of the wage rate. And as the video noted, a lot of businesses operate illegally, I'm sure, to escape this very high payroll tax. Per capita income, though, is pretty good for the developing world, a little over $11,000 per capita, but there is a lot of disparity in income levels, and you'll see that when we travel to Brazil. One challenge that you will hear over and over again is poor infrastructure, particularly roads and rails. You'll hear the farmers complaining about this. You'll see a rail line that was built into the Mato Grosso and just opened up for the first time a few years ago, and you'll hear them talk about the congestion at the ports. They have a democratic government, but as you could see, it has a large bureaucracy, and there is always the allegations of corruption. And as I mentioned before, disparity in income is a big issue, and there is a lot of poverty, particularly in the northeast part of the country, which we will not visit, and the southern part, which we will visit in the last part of our trip, is much more prosperous. Brazil is very dependent on commodities and their natural resources. Normally we would think of this as a benefit, and it really is, but it also presents some challenges. They're a large exporter of iron ore, a large exporter of oil, and a large exporter of agricultural products. Their biggest customer is China, and with slower growth in China, particularly in construction, Brazil has been hard hit. Their iron ore exports are down, the prices of oil have collapsed this year, and agricultural product prices are also down. With China's slowdown, it has really taken a toll on Brazil. And in addition to this, they have had a huge corruption scandal in their state-owned oil company, Petrobras, which has led to calls, as you heard in the video, for the impeachment of their president. There are a number of economic consequences to what's going on in Brazil. First of all, it's projected that their gross domestic product will actually shrink this year. Their inflation rate is creeping up. Their government has had to take on more government debt, and there is a real need for austerity policies in the country. But citizens are not happy with that, and the left-leaning government has been reluctant to institute the necessary austerity policies. This has led to some political instability, as we mentioned earlier, the call for the impeachment of their president. And their currency, the Brazilian real, has fallen dramatically in value. The dramatic fall of the Brazilian real and the rise of the US dollar has had some big impacts on our economy as well. This chart shows the Brazilian reals per euro and the US dollars per euro, which is the top line. As you see these spread apart, that means that for customers like those in Europe or elsewhere in the world, that Brazilian products are much cheaper than US products, and our product prices are going up simply because of the strength of our currency and the weakness of the Brazilian real. Since we're such a strong competitor with Brazil, this has had a big impact and has led to some increasing share of Brazil in agricultural export markets. Despite the challenges, Brazil still has vast potential. They have as much as 470 million acres of untapped potential farmland. They are rich in natural resources, and while this may make them more vulnerable in the current world economy, in the long run it is an asset. China, for example, is investing in infrastructure throughout South America, and specifically in Brazil and Peru, China plans a joint $10 billion project to build a rail line from the Atlantic in Brazil to the Pacific in Peru. The following video is a bit dated. It's by BASF, but it's still a very good way for us to wrap up our overview of Brazil. Well, I hope that whets your appetite to learn some more about Brazil and gets you excited about our upcoming trip. It'll be a great trip. Next time we'll look at where we are going in Brazil and the agriculture in these areas. In case you want to do some advanced work, we'll be traveling to the states of Sao Paulo, Mato Grosso, and Rio Grande do Sul. Well, that's all for now. Hope this is helpful.